Good afternoon, everybody. We sort of all more or less ready to get going. Not quite. A few later arrivals. Come in, folks. Very happy to see you. More the merrier. Right. Well, thanks very much to everybody for coming from very far and very wide today. We really do appreciate it. This is our 3rd anniversary celebration for SME Alliance, and later on Nikki will explain why she chose that word. And just so you know, we sort of hope we get about 100 people here. I think we've got a lot more, and we've still got people coming in, so that's great. I've got a few housekeeping matters which I've got to mention before I forget, before I get told off. One is all donations gratefully received. This event is essentially funded by the directors, and our membership system works on the basis it's £60 a year. If you haven't got any money, it's £5 a month. If you haven't got any money, it's free. So to the extent that anyone's got any money, we'd be delighted if you'd like to help contribute to this event. Thank you. Second thing is, apparently we are being filmed this afternoon. We might also be on one of the news channels later. If you don't want to be filmed on the news channel, perhaps you should move to the back or hide or something else. That's the housekeeping is done, right? On to the real stuff. So I'm Nick Gould, and in my other life I am a corporate and business lawyer. But I'm making this introduction and welcoming you all here as the chairman of SME Alliance and one of its co-founders. For those of you who don't know, and that must be very, very few of you today, we are a lobbying and knowledge sharing and support group founded, as you might guess, just over 3 years ago. Our members are mostly, but not entirely, owners of SMEs whose lives and businesses, like those of thousands of other people, were to a greater or lesser extent ruined by the actions of LLoyds, HBOS, RBS in particular. You all know this, or almost all of you know that it's truly nasty stuff. Later on, some of you not directly affected by what we're going to talk about today can talk to many of those who were affected and are still suffering from the destructive behaviour of RBS, the bank in which, how nice for us all, we own 73%, and LLoyds HBOS. I'm still not clear in my own mind about the senior management of banks, but I doubt if any of you are either. One point I made in a talk I gave at an FT seminar recently is that certain senior bankers somehow want to reduce all these matters that we're going to be talking about today, and all of you, what we can call victims or claimants, to just numbers. I think that somehow it's insulting and it's completely wrong. It's so important, and we can see by just looking around at each other and generally here, that each person is very much an individual with their own story to tell. And on that point, I'd like to thank all the journalists and media who have been supporting us over the last 3 years and have been supporting individuals for a lot more than that. It's really important. It's really important we recognise that, and we continue to work with these people, and they can tell the stories of SME Alliance members as real people with real lives. When we started SME Alliance 3 years ago, I doubt if anyone thought it would take on as it has. We're still fairly new and fairly small, but the fact we have such an amazing group of people here today, thank you all, must say something about us. I'm fairly sure there are some pretty good reasons for the progress we're making. First, as I just noted, we're a lobbying group, an information sharing group and a support group, and that's all we are right now. Despite what many on social media seem to think and seem to encourage, we are not, as Nikki will also emphasise later on, we are not a bank bashing group. That's not going to get us anywhere. What would be the point? We can't fight the whole world, and certain of the banks and their senior management, and certain of their advisors, and some of the regulators, and even apparently some of the legal system, in which I have to declare an interest, make up a significant part of that world. We need to work with people we can work with, and when we can't work with them, we need to find others we can. So I believe also we must be very careful as a group not to generalise. Not all banks are bad, and not all senior bankers are corrupt bastards, despite what some on social media seem to think. Really.
A different snowflake.
Also, some people apparently believe it's a provable fact that the entire UK judiciary, or most of it, is enthralled to the banks. Then I think I'll just pack up and go home now. Secondly, this is an organisation for the benefit of our members. It's not run for the benefit of the board or anything else, or anyone else. And we really do, as a group, try and help our members, whenever and however we can. I'd like to thank, personally and particularly, all those advisors who are here today, and actually the ones who can't be here, who give so much of their time to help members and others. I say some are here today and some aren't. But without that help, I don't think we would be what we are today. In fact, we probably wouldn't even exist, so thank you very much. Third, and I know people get fed up with this, we have learned to silo break. We want to encourage as many different interest groups as possible to work with us. Whether they're academics, sadly lacking in most of these discussions, I think there might be one or two here today, but I don't know, professionals or the media, all can help us by working together with our members. Thanks also to the APPG for working so closely with us. Your support is much appreciated. And who knows where all this might lead? As Clive May, I don't know if Clive is here or not. Hello, Clive. As Clive May, the erstwhile simple bricklayer, but now the brick lawyer, would say, where else could a simple brickie and a top international lawyer work together? His description may be wrong in several ways, but that he's right about working together. As I said, we were formed by social media, and it's really important we use social media to develop our networks and increase our membership. As somebody pointed out this morning, if every member found 2 or 3 new people on social media, we would grow very quickly, which is something we really need to do. We're beginning to be quite strong as we are, and imagine how much stronger we can be if we can bring in more members. So, at the start of this event, I'm doing the looking back, and at the end of the event, Nikki will do the looking forward, if that makes sense. The biggest headline of the year so far was, of course, the jail of 6 people for a total of more than 45 years. What's become well known as the HBOS regular fraud. 2 of those jailed, it's worth emphasising and repeating in case Lloyds has conveniently forgotten yet again, were bank employees. The cost to destroy businesses was up to £1 billion, and I never know where the 245 million quoting in the press comes from. I guess some on the panel here today, and some not on the panel, will have lots to say about HBOS and Lloyds. The big question for me, as a corporate deal-doing lawyer, is what's stopping Lloyds cutting its losses and doing a deal, or deals now? The next bank we should perhaps sadly have to look at is RBS. The war with the RBS group, and it feels like a war to many people, goes on and on. Appalling revelations since last year include the RBS GRG victory emails, dash and cash scandal. Clive and others will be happy to talk to you more about this later. I do wonder, as do many others here, why the RBS sent LBC Radio a list before a radio phone-in last week with Ross McEwen with a list of names considered unacceptable. Clive was on that list, and Angela, who's here somewhere, wasn't, so managed to ask some questions of Ross McEwen. I use the word war just now because to many of us I think it feels like some people at RBS would rather spend £100,000 in professional fees fighting and destroying a family business than doing a deal. Again, it's odd for me as I'm a deal-doing lawyer. Why not do deals and move on? And if the banks didn't continue on what can only be described as their pathetic ways and hadn't squandered so many tens of billions of pounds all those years ago, maybe we'd have more money to use on rather more useful objectives, like supporting abused children, taking them out of squalor, improving social service for the elderly, that sort of thing. Tied into this, I'm afraid, is the apparent lack of any real moral, ethical, or similar concepts being effectively implemented at the top of the banks and then down through those banks. And as for the words corporate governance, that well thrown out phrase, don't make me laugh. What is sad, though, is all the tens of thousands of people who work at the banks and at the bank counters would be horrified if they knew actually what was going on at the top. Now, moving to today, I'd like to thank our panel for giving up their time to be here. It should be a fascinating discussion, and thanks to the man with the microphone, Andy Verity. When we do throw questions open to you on the floor later on, can you please keep your questions short and to the point? Rant and rave later on, but not during question time, if you don't mind. Finally, so far as thanks are concerned, they must go, as ever, and as they always will do, to the Turner family, Paul, Nikki, Sophie and Laura. You are all amazing. And without you, we just wouldn't exist. So thanks a lot, guys and girls. So where are we after by 3 years. We punch well above our weight, we get noticed a lot, we're quoted a lot in the media, which also asks our members for help from time to time. I think it's fair to say we're not flavour of the month within the banking industry or with the regulators, but we don't really care. As I said, we try and help real people with real lives, not as many bankers and many of their advisors would like to classify those here today. Numbers. They were not numbers, they are just real people with real lives, and we need to continue to remember that. But equally, as I said to people before the start of this event, I wish in many ways we didn't need to exist. And I wish very much that senior executives and directors of banks operated in a transparent, moral, ethical way, paying genuine attention to the ideas of corporate governance, of law and justice. I also want to believe in the tooth fairy. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you.
I'm Andy Verity, I'm economics correspondent at BBC News. Welcome to this event. I also take an interest in bank misconduct, which is why I've done so many stories in recent years. I'd like to introduce you to the panel here, who are going to do their best to field your questions. We're going to have some pre-written questions from various members of the audience first, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. So think of what you'd like to ask. We'd like to keep the discussion going, so relatively short contributions from everybody, please. So just to introduce the panel, George Kerevan at the end of the table there. Is a former academic economist and Labour councillor turned SME MP, and led the charge, as you may know, for the All-Party Parliamentary Group on fair business banking until recently, when the general election meant he could no longer do so. He's taken a great interest in this, both on that group and in the Treasury Select Committee, and has started to bang the drum harder and harder in the recent years over the mistreatment of small and medium-sized enterprises. The other end of the table, we've got Johnathan Ford. He, after going to Westminster and Oxford, I've been reading Wikipedia, turned up at Lex on the Financial Times and wrote there in the 1990s before helping to found a very successful commentary website called Breaking Views, and has subsequently been chief leader writer at the Financial Times, now city editor. On his Twitter profile it says he likes trouble, food and Danish crime drama. And I think we've probably got all of those here, but food. We've got trouble, and if you've watched Follow the Money, I think the scriptwriters were talking to some of the people here in this audience. Also, just to my right, Anthony Stansfield, who's Thames Valley Police and Crime Commissioner. Anthony had a career in the military, worked for the Royal Green Jackets, served in Borneo and Northern Ireland, and flew helicopters in the Falklands. So he's not afraid of combat and conflict, including against the banks. And as a Conservative on West Berkshire Council, he then went on to join the Thames Valley Police Authority, where it began its investigation into the fraud at HBOS Reading. His time flying helicopters gives him something in common with the panellists just to my left. He also had something to do with helicopters in this unique group. Noel Edmonds needs no introduction, of course. I listened to him when I was 8 years old on multicolour Scottish shows. Reminded me of a phone number which is probably lodged in the brain of everybody over 40, 01811 874. Also lodged in our brains are Teddy Alex, Mr. Blobby, Deal or No Deal. His unique group was a very successful business venture, and it's unusual for a TV star to go on to be such a successful business person. His unique group wasn't quite unique in one respect, that it fell prey to the HBOS fraud. And it wasn't until years after the fact and going through all the hell that's been described very eloquently in the newspapers by Noel, that he realised he'd been the victim of a fraudster called Mark Dobson, who was convicted at the beginning of this year, and has started to become really, along with Anthony, one of the bank's worst adversaries, it's fair to say. So let's begin with the questions. The first one comes from Nikki. Nikki, do you want to stand up and ask the first question?
I should just say, I'm asking this question because A, it has to be asked, B, so many people wrote in with the same question, and I thought that I would very sort of tactfully put the question myself to the panel. Does the panel think the FCA should publish the Section 166 review to RBS GRG given it's already been leaked to several parties, including the BBC and Anonymous?
And I'll swerve that question by asking you.
I took on board that we've been asked to be brief, but I do feel the need just to say one thing before I answer the question. I'm not a big fan of social media, but my wife occasionally visits the dark space that is Twitter, and she said that there have been comments against me saying that I was jumping on somebody else's bandwagon, and I'd come to the party a little bit late, and I was exploiting the SME Alliance and other associates for my own benefit. And I just want to assure you that I'm way outside my comfort zone here. I may have TV and radio experience, but sitting on this panel makes me very nervous, and I'm extremely aware there are people in this room who have undergone even more stress and duress than I and my family have. I'm also acutely aware there are people in this room, ladies and gentlemen, who are finer business people than I will ever be. And then I'm sitting on a panel with people who have much greater knowledge than I do about so many aspects of this. So I'm here with a very large mantle of humility, and I will try and keep my answers as brief as possible. What has happened to me in the last few months since Mail on Sunday, thankfully, spread my story over 2 weekends. That really helped, and I'd like to thank them very much indeed for the manner in which they did that, is that I have now received the most astonishing emails, the most astonishing contacts, people coming to my house uninvited, people giving me documentation, and documentation that I really do not want to see. And I'll give you one example on Monday, if you don't mind me just saying this, Andy, because I think it is something you will understand why I want to say this. I opened an email on Monday from a man who said that he was so broken by the banks that he had purchased a shotgun, and it was his intention within 28 days to go down to his local bank and shoot himself in front of the staff so that they would understand the trauma that he'd gone through, because they would be blighted for the rest of their lives. I commend Avon and Somerset Police, I live in Bristol, who within 4 hours came back to me and said he was located. He's actually embarrassed and apologetic that he stressed you, and he's with his family, and we are satisfied he is being supported. That's quite a wow to get on your personal email, and I'm getting these all the time. I didn't ask to receive an FCA report. Apologies for the long answer, but I think this comes down, I can't wait to hear the experts' views, but I think this comes down to what we mean about what is in public interest. The situation as I see it is that we have to answer the question, in whose interest is it for it to be published? You could say, and this is a figure given to me by Lawrence Tomlinson, who wrote the 2013 report that arguably triggered all this, that the claims that RBS would receive would be in excess of £100 billion. The bank is worth a quarter of that. It would be the end of RBS. What would it do to the UK economy? So you can answer that publishing is not in the national interest. The fact that we own 70% of the bank plus shareholders isn't in their interest. I've come to the conclusion that publication of the report is in the victim's interest. And as a victim of Lloyds, I understand why the victims want it to be published. I hope you understand why I regard this as a complex question, because are we actually in a supposed free and open society to admit that sometimes the truth is something we have to suppress?
Yes, the answer is of course we should publish it. There are a great number of victims involved in this. I have a responsibility for PCC for victims of crimes. I consider crimes have happened. And if they are aware of those crimes, they should publish the report.
I just say it's nice to be back with the SME Alliance. Of course, the 166 should be published. I had had a chance when I was a member of the Treasury Select Committee to actually put this to Griffith Jones and Andrew Bailey and say you should publish. Give me your reasons why you don't. The first reason for not doing so was that if you routinely publish 166 reports, then the FCA would not be able to get city experts to carry out these investigations because their judgments would be called into question in the media. Personally, I thought that was a very threadbare explanation for why they shouldn't publish. We're not talking about commerciality here. As Noel said, we're talking about the regulatory system, which has to be open and clear and in the public domain, and therefore these reports should be routinely published. The second reason from Griffith Jones and Bailey why they wouldn't publish them is to do with the fact that there was an ongoing FCA investigation into the RBS GRG events, and therefore they did not want to publish parts of reports or introduce evidence into the public domain before they were in a position to actually publish the full FCA report. As we know, the FCA report into GRG is kicked every yet again into the long grass, and if it ends up with where we were with the HBOS report, it will go on for yet more years. The point is that when the FCA produces a report, it goes to the parties involved, and the FCA report on GRG will go to RBS, and then it will go through the infamous maximisation process, whereby the RBS lawyers pick away at this sentence and that sentence and this conclusion, and then it goes back to the FCA back and forth, in order to just prolong the whole process until everybody's forgotten about it. The best way of stopping that kind of abuse of due process is to publish key parts of reports as they go along, which is why, again, we should get 166 into the public domain. The final point is that there is probably one reason why we get into the situation with the 166 reports. The FCA simply doesn't have enough staff or enough resources to cover all of the activities and all of the regulation it's meant to use. That's why it offshores to city organisations some of these reporting activities. It would be much better and much healthier, in fact. It would stop the kind of conflicts of interest that arise if, instead of paying large amounts of money to city organisations to do these reports, the FCA was given the resources it needs to actually conduct the reports itself.
Thank you, George.
Well, I have to say I'm going to be a little more cautious perhaps than the other panelists, in that I do think that there are reasons why one wants to be a little bit cautious about this idea of a rolling cycle of publication. Because you have to think about what is the purpose of this document, this report that's been published. And it is really, its purpose is to effectively to inform the regulator candidly of what's been going on, with a view to the regulator taking a decision whether it should pursue some sort of enforcement action. And given its nature, I think that there is a kind of concern about prejudgment if we're really saying every single section 166 that is triggered by a complaint, which may or may not ultimately be justified, should routinely be published. I'm a little bit anxious about whether that is really the route down which we want to go. I think in this particular case, with the GRG situation, I think there is probably a stronger case for the FCA thinking about the idea of publishing some or all of this report on the grounds that where we are is really a situation where the reason this sort of groundswell has sort of taken hold about this particular report reflects, to my mind, a degree of lack of confidence in the regulatory process. And it may well be that in light of that, it makes sense for the FCA to be more candid than it would otherwise be in this particular situation. But I have to say, I'm a little bit troubled by the idea that we should have this sort of, we should go for this complete transparency, given the fact that actually in many cases it may be that the regulator, for example, decides that there was no case to answer from the regulator?
Yeah, I'm just going to chip in a little bit myself here. I mean, it's not my call that the BBC whether or not to publish its report, but I thought it was very significant that the regulator published a summary of it at the end of last year, which was the other way around to the executive summary in the actual report. The bullet points in the summary that they put out were about failure, and then further down in the summary, that there were mitigating factors. In the published summary, it's the other way around. The other thing that's left out of the published summary is the fact that it concludes that it was an intentional and coordinated strategy to put the bank's interests ahead of those of its customers. And I've tweeted that, we put that out. Now, in a way, that's the most important thing. And I think you have to ask, however much you may say the public interest is in allowing regulatory processes to take their course. This report was called for by Bill Esterson, who is the business secretary, and then a public outcry. We have another public outcry here. There is information there, research has been done. Why not publish it? Yeah. Also, if the report concludes that it's an intentional and coordinated strategy and places responsibility with the board, it could conceivably lead to a different outcome with civil litigation going through the courts at the moment. Can it be right for the Financial Conduct Authority to arrogate to itself the decision as to whether to publish that or withhold it from the judicial process? So that's just does anybody want to make any comments about publication of the report from the floor, very briefly?
I'll do it. No problem. I'm quite happy to do that. If someone gives me a copy of the report, I will get it into the public domain. Simple.
Okay.
Just while the microphone's moving across, Andrew Bailey, the FCA, sent me a letter making it very clear that if I did anything other than keep it to myself, it's a criminal offence.
Yeah, I'm prepared to deal with that.
Okay, but I just felt the need just to show that.
Do you want to make a comment?
Surely that's fine, man. On this side.
I'm just telling you what happened.
Yeah. There's a man sat beside you who can deal with that job.
In terms of the FCA's good faith in this matter, the Treasury Select did consider that the report should be read by the Treasury Select Committee or its lawyers in private in order to see if some of the issues that come up were germane to the committee's progress. And FCA turned that down as well.
Isn't there a principle here, Anthony, that you could actually have a report with any confidential information redacted? I think the criminal offence that you would threaten with possibly might have to do with Section 348 of the Financial Services Act, where it says you can't release confidential information.
Well, I'm in an extremely difficult position in all of this because I have a great deal of information that in my view is utterly completely damning, not of RBS, but of LLoyds. And I, of course, cannot release this because it didn't come up in the trial. And the trial, of course, was about HBOS. It wasn't about what went on in LLoyds. And that is the really difficult one for me at the moment. I would love to put that a lot into the public domain.
Sorry, just before we move on from that subject, I just wanted to let everyone know we've had a letter from Andrew Bailey, and there's another problem that they've got, because we wrote to him and we said that we felt that by withholding information that could help people in their civil cases, it's possible that the FCA are complicit in miscarriages of justice. And the letter that we've had back hangs on about that far more than anything else, but it hits a point that we feel really strongly about. If the FCA continues to withhold information, I mean, the HBOS Reading case being a classic case, you know, we went through 22 eviction hearings while the FCA or FSA sat on information that would have made it very easy for the authorities to say, no, this can't happen. So I think it's an interesting point that the FSA or the FCA has to look at how much damage or how much liability it has stands for withholding information, because it could help people and cause, help people not to be suicidal and help people not to have their lives ruined. But no, it uses Section 348 as a weapon against SMEs, really.
Thank you, Nick. Let's move on to the second question, which comes from Clive May. I think you're right next to the people. You want to grab the mic? Give us your question.
Does the panel think that the HBOS Reading and GRG were rogue departments or indications of a greater malaise within the banks, or as the Brickley would say, problem? Are those two the only departments that you think the problem, or is it a wider issue in banking? Thanks.
Johnathan,
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to draw a distinction between the two cases. I think HBOS Reading is clearly a fraud. It remains the subject of some debate, who knew what when, but pretty much what we know is that the people who were working in that department were effectively running a scam to enrich themselves, and to some extent at the bank's expense. I think GRG is a bit different. GRG, to my mind, I'm actually less closely involved in that case, is one where you have a situation where the bank has imposed, if you like, through a series of financial incentives, has encouraged, effectively, has created a situation where a department is doing things which is very much against the interests of its customers and actually actively destructive of a lot of that. And that is clearly, in my view, a systemic problem, in the sense that if banks are going to give encouragement to staff to sell financial products, as in the interest rate hedging case, or to remove credit from customers to reduce the bank's own lending requirements, that's clearly a systemic issue which needs to be dealt with. I think in terms of HBOS Reading and other things, it's what is sort of troubling about this whole thing has been the kind of inability to confront what took place at the bank, by the banks, particularly HBOS and Lloyds. And I think there the issue is to some extent, is one where you need to concentrate personal accountability on the people in charge of these organisations. And I think we have made some steps in that direction since the crisis. But I'd say they're still fairly halting steps. And I think it would be interesting, it remains to be seen whether many of these mechanisms, such as the senior managers regime, will actually function as we're told they will do, and act as a check on, effectively force banks to take a kind of more, effectively to take more of a grip on their organisations and make sure they are acting responsibly with their customers. Because clearly we've had a situation in the past where that hasn't been the case.
no. Is it a wider malaise, or as far as you can see, is it something confined to rogues?
I've turned down 4 opportunities to go on Celebrity Mastermind, but if I ever decided I would, my specialist subject now, unfortunately, is British Banking 1992 to present day. As I said in my opening comments, I am not an expert, and I'm not sitting here, ladies and gentlemen, pretending to be anything other than what I am. I'm a man who's read a lot of books now and has had a lot of information. And I call it the BBC. This is the British business card, and it was a strategy introduced in the 1990s. It has been ferociously pursued by banks who were given the Gordon Brown light touch opportunity, like giving heroin to the drug addicts, and it is the cancer of our financial institutions. And it just so happened that a tumour appeared in the form of the Reading 6. And I've often wondered if that had not manifested itself, whether or not any of this would be the subject of the kind of discussion we're having today. We have got a major crisis in this country because banks decided the way to get money quick was out of the small to medium-sized business sector.
George, whether it's across the whole sector.
It's across the whole sector, and there's a continuum clearly between the HBOS Reading case where there was culpable fraud, all the way through to the banking model that we have. And as Noel was just saying, the problem is that the regulatory regime that we have sorts out problems for consumers and individual customers, hence API. The regulatory system and government intervention saves the banks. The one sector that gets missed out, and has been clearly missed out in terms of redress since 2008 and before that, is the small business sector. And the reason is not actually, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's the malfeasance of individual bankers or the Uyghurs and all of that about. It's simply an imbalance of power. The individual small businesses in the marketplace faced with a major bank, how do they get redress? Well, of course they can take legal action, but we all know how impossible that's going to be, particularly if the bank, even if it's caught red-handed, is simply going to go on and on and on with its corporate lawyers grinding you down. So the solution, I'm kind of a solution guy, I think we have to put in place some form of regulation between the banks and the small business sector. One level, and this is where the APPG was still working, we should give it its support in this because the job's still to be done, is to put in place a tribunal system so that it's not up to the banks to decide what the redress is and then be patted on the head by FCA. But also, in a broader sense, we need to expand the regulatory curtain so that small businesses are covered by the direct intervention of the regulator, rather than the regulator sitting and saying, well, it's none of my business, which is what happens now.
Anthony?
Yes, to answer the question directly, I think this was just the tip of an iceberg. I think it went on in a number of banks and on a very large scale. I think what was unusual about the HBOS case, and from what I've seen is different from other cases, that it was a two-way fraud. They were defrauding the bank as well as the customers, where most of the other ones, it was just the bank, in my view, defrauding its customers. So there is a difference. What I find so extraordinary about it is that it must have been known quite clearly to the directors of the bank, as far back as February 2008, that a massive fraud had taken place. And I didn't say that lightly. There is absolutely clear evidence of that. The Lloyds then went on for 10 years pursuing the victims, their own customers of the fraud, to take away their houses, their personal wealth, and the remains of their company and their personal guarantees. When I have no doubt, in my mind, that the directors knew perfectly well that it was a fraud. And I find that utterly disgraceful.
No, just thinking of allegations and a cover-up, what do you have to say about the bank's approach to attempts to raise the fraud with it going bankers and their view of their culpability now?
Lloyds. How do I feel about the fact that Horto No Sorry keeps saying he didn't know anything about crime? Can I rephrase the question? Is that allowable? I mean, I do find it absolutely extraordinary. I find it extraordinary that we haven't jailed a single bankster. Utterly extraordinary that Peter Cumming is in a very exclusive club. I'd like to see more people banned from the city. But we've got a very big problem in this country that extends beyond just this subject. And that is we've created what I call the liararchy. And it's totally acceptable for people in the highest offices in the land to tell a lie. I'm totally apolitical, but when Theresa May can run around and say there's not going to be an election and then instantly there's an election, you know, are we not tired of people telling us lies? In the case of Lloyds, it is inconceivable that Horto No Sorry did not know about the Reading crime. It is also inconceivable that he does not know about the crimes committed in Bristol and also in London. And my case is an interesting one because they totally accepted that I'm a victim, otherwise why haven't they put me into the review, and why do I have mediation on November the 10th? I don't know why they call it mediation, because my understanding of the term is that one side proposes something, the other side has a counter proposal, and a mediator tries to arrive in the middle. Well, I've had no proposal from Lloyds, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm still calling it a settlement meeting, the born optimist. But, you know, Auto Authority can't have it both ways. White can't have it both ways. The senior management, the board, all of these people can't have it both ways. You're either really good at your job and therefore you know about wrongdoing in your business, or you're not. So I don't see how he can keep saying, with this shrug of shoulders, we didn't know about what went on in HBOS or Lloyds. Because, Mr. Osorio, it's your job to know. So you're either a shit banker or you're a liar.
Let's move on to another question. Noel mentioned in his remarks earlier that it goes back a number of years. And there's one person here who's got particular experience going back a while who has a question about whether it's before or after the credit crunch. Nigel Henderson.
I'll manage without, I think I've got a strong enough voice. I'm perhaps one of the furthest travelled people here today from the northeast of Scotland, and again one of the founder members of SME Alliance, and it's a pleasure to be here and see so many people supporting the SME Alliance. And just to pick up from the comments that Noel made, that this goes back to the 1990s, I would ask the panel, many banks are happy to proliferate the idea that the majority of SME customers' complaints have arisen post the credit crunch. Our members know divisions like GRG were in place as far back as the 1990s, and some people like me have been fighting for justice for over 20 years. The GRG, of course, in its previous iteration was called Specialised Lending Services. Is it right they should be denied justice because of limitation issues, or should recent revelations about systemic abuse give grounds for older cases to be revisited?
I think this is not something that started in 2007, 2008. It was going on before, but I think it accelerated in the banking crisis. But what bankers, lawyers seem to be very good at is putting things off indefinitely. And I think if there is evidence that they have prevaricated for a number of years, then there shouldn't be a statute of limitations on this.
Well, I agree that I agree totally with the question that this is a long-standing problem. I think it goes back to the sort of reorganisations of their business which the banks undertook in the 80s and 90s, which essentially took lending out of branches and put it into larger units, often controlled centrally by the top business management, and and the way these things were operated were by the use of often financial incentives. It's one of the reasons why the whole GRG case, this question of whether or not it was a profit centre or was simply a management business of the bad debts in the bank is become such a top hot issue. I tend to agree with Anthony. I think if there is a situation where it is clear that, as George said earlier, there's an enormous power imbalance between companies, smaller businesses and banks, and there's also no doubt that banks have been using sort of industrial grade sort of legal strength and muscle to basically contain all of these issues. And you only have to look at some of the correspondence going back years on the Reading case, which I have looked at, to see the way in which it is extremely difficult for people to make headway against organisations which stone from a legal perspective and effectively challenge you to take enormous risks with what remains of your finances to contest the position that the bank is taking. So I think where there are cases going back, now clearly fraud is different fraud has a much longer, and it's one of the reasons why the Reading case, I think, is once again a slightly separate issue. But I think there are cases where people have effectively justice has been denied over a long period. I think there is a very strong case to say that we should look again at this question of whether that should be limited and whether these people should be denied any sort of redress.
Thanks. I mean, there's redress on the one side, and on the other hand, there's accountability. Another question that's coming to me is, does the panel think directors should be personally liable for the actions of their banks? This already happens in areas such as bribery law, health and safety law. There's almost a presumption of directors' responsibility for the criminal actions that take place under their watch.
I think if they've clearly lied, then yes, they should. I think the reason that fraud is, I believe, not on anything like the scale of the United States of America, is that bankers there and senior businessmen know perfectly well that if they're taken to court for swindling people, they will get very large sentences. In this country, they seem to think they're above the law at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree with the last comment. As many people in this room will know, fraud, in the context we're talking about, is a violent crime. And one issue which I think we should be looking at came to me when a few weeks ago I saw a report in, I think, the Times about a case in Stafford Crown Court where a man who had harassed his girlfriend to such an extent that she took her life was sentenced to 15 years. Now, where's the difference? If these bankers harass people to their lives, I'm not trying to, please understand, I'm not trying to dominate the platform or whip anything up, but I do really believe we have to look at this whole subject of what constitutes crime in this context. And when it destroys people's lives, that seems to me to get very close to manslaughter. And the only way we are going to get change in our lifetime, looking around at all the grey hairs, yes, I die, in our lifetime, is for this to be so serious that the banksters step back and they have to be personally accountable and they have to know people who have gone to jail.
Yes. Just remind people that we did come close to actually introducing legislation that would have made senior bankers personally liable. And that was a result of the recommendations from the Banking Commission, which Parliament set up in the wake of the 2008 crisis. And all the main parties bought into that. And it went into a financial act. And then at the last minute, just as the provisions of that legislation were about to come into force, George Osborne got rid of them, reversed that. And he was under huge pressure from the commercial banks, the major banks, who were telling him, we'll leave the City of London unless you do this. So you have to wonder if you get that kind of political pressure, then that more than justifies the fact that we need to make these bankers individually responsible. It can still be done. It's still be done.
In the floor, I'd like to throw it out to the floor and get some views from people. Nick Wilson, I think.
Hi, yes. I think there's something that people are missing here, and it may be that people don't appreciate. Noel said, why haven't any of these bankers gone to prison? There is no authority currently in Britain that investigates fraud. City of London Police recently, through no act of Parliament, changed their business model from authority of the College of Policing. Now, if they have a big fraud case, they say the first port of call is our partner, partner regulators or whatever. They send it to the FCA. The FCA, their position is we do not prosecute standalone fraud. They've told that to the Treasury Select Committee. They told it to me. They do not prosecute standalone fraud. They only look at fraud if it's part of another area of irregularity. So there is nobody. I mean, it's fantastic the Thames Valley Police did prosecution, but that was unique. But the main police who are supposed to investigate the economic crime, the City of London Economic Crime Unit, they now no longer do it. And nor does the FCA. And also, the City of London Police are now outsourcing fraud investigations to the magic circle of lawyers in the City of London.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much. I just want to give one more comment before I come back to the panel. There's another guy on the same table.
Hi, Trevor Neelan. What about the pit bull solicitors that Lloyds use to try and break people down when they go to court and they lie, and the barristers lie? When you go to the SRA, you're told you're not their client. The bank is, we can't do anything. You're told to go to FOS. They're useless. I'm due back in court on the 12th of December. The first two times in court, February, and about 8 weeks ago, we had a very good judge. I caught the barrister out on securitisation. The judge raised an order that we could find out more. Now, when we went back to court 2 weeks ago, the barrister, a different judge this time, the barrister totally denied that she said our property was assigned, securitised. The judge wiped it under the table. I'm a litigant in person. We've had 7 witness statements ripped out 2 weeks ago. We've had other bits ripped out. The second judge that we've got, the second judge that we've got has just ripped all my defence away when I go back. Right. What about the solicitors that the banks use that lie and pour more and more money into it?
Sure.
Okay.
We've got 2 points there, I think. Without getting too much into the detail of any individual stories, we have to stick to the general points. But points there about access to justice and about the truthfulness of the bank's lawyers. But let's first pick up about the business of the body to prosecute fraud. Anthony?
I have to say I largely agree with you. Portsmouth University last year put out a report reckoning that the amount of fraud in this country is running at 193 billion a year. We spend, 40 million on the Serious Fraud Office and 15 million on the City of London Police. It is totally inadequate. The police are under huge pressure at the moment with so many more things they're required to do, and the budget's cut by about 25–26%. That fraud is something that the vast majority of police forces simply do not have the capacity or the capability to take on. I find it quite extraordinary that it costs Thames Valley £7 million to prosecute this case over 3 years, the HBOS case, which we have not been paid a penny back. Yet the Home Office has just given Wiltshire Police £1.1 million for pursuing the case against, on very slim evidence, a man who might have been a paedophile and who died 18 years ago. What the hell are we up to? I think there is a way to solve this. I think the Financial Conduct Authority over the last 5 years has averaged about £1 billion a year in fines it has pays as peanuts compared to what was done in America on banks. That money goes straight back to the Treasury. Where it should go is into financing the police at a regional level to have serious fraud units to deal with this with real experts. And if that was done, and we put more money into the SFO and the FCA to deal essentially with overseas crime, which you do with the NCA, the SFO, and city crime, which should be left to the City of London if enough money was put into it. I think we could solve, if we could reduce fraud by 10 or 15% in this country by prosecuting a few senior bankers, I would be staggered. And that, to just put it in context, if you reduced it by 10%, that would pay for the entire British police force. This is the scale of it, but the Treasury does not want to do this, and it's very difficult to actually work out why. I think we have a real problem on this one.
One thought that came to me some weeks ago
comfort. We seem to be experiencing death by acronym here. There are so many different organisations and so many different words and whatever. But you see, I'm very simple. I'm not very keen on this culture we've created in this country, where people express opinions and discuss things and then do bugger all. It's a feature of social media where the moment you press a button and you send it, people go, oh, that's it. I just called him a complete tosser or whatever, so that's changed everything. Now, I've also been asked to do question time and say no, because I just can't stand that programme or listening to Jeremy Vine, where, yes, of course, everyone's entitled to an opinion, but what the hell are you going to do about it? So here we go. There are problems with all the acronyms. There's problems with the Treasury, etc. Fraud, and I totally understand the legal definition of it and whatever, but it's theft. It's actually stealing something. In the context of all of us here, they stole houses, businesses, relationships. Just imagine a scenario where a very small number of the victims, and I'm not just talking lawyers, you could say anyone who's been missold PPI, because that is actually a crime. Risky mis-selling of PPI is a crime, apparently. Now imagine if people went to their local police with documentation and the name of someone and said, there's a crime. The police are obliged to give you a crime number. They have to start an investigation. And for the reasons that's been mentioned, they will always say there aren't enough resources. But if Wiltshire can find 1.1 million or whatever to investigate a dead Prime Minister, I'm sure money is out there somewhere. But this then becomes a Home Office problem. And that means it's a Treasury problem. And then it means it's a government problem. And that is a problem that will make them sit up because they have to.
You pursued this to the top, didn't you?
Yes. A few months ago, I wrote in a certain amount of detail what I thought was going on within the banking system of the Prime Minister. And I have to say, the number 10 has been very supportive in me continuing to push this. But it was interesting. My letter went to the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Jeremy Hayward. And I'll quote two letters. I was very concerned to read the extremely serious allegations set out in the letter, and I'm grateful to you for bringing the attention of the Prime Minister. And the last sentence, given the extremely serious nature of your allegations, I'll keep a close eye on this and be very happy to meet you if you would find it useful. Well, I thought it would be useful. So I got my office to get onto his office and say, we'd like to fix up a meeting. This is the letter I got back. Dear Mr. Stansfield, thank you for your recent letters. On the recommendations given to me in briefings on this case, I've decided I will be unable to meet with you to discuss these matters. I would recommend that you make contact with the Serious Fraud Office. I find that the most extraordinary letter. After all, I'm elected with vastly more votes than any MP is. I cover a very wide area. And for him to send back that letter, I then wrote to him and said, could you tell me why and who has made these recommendations to you? And I have to say, 6 weeks later, I've not had a reply to my letters. I find that quite extraordinary, not only bad manners, but very odd. And I think that is the politest way of putting it.
Yeah. Since 2008 and the banking crisis, we've, in this country, and other countries, particularly this country, we've recast the regulatory system. And when I was an MP, I got my staff together and tried to draw a chart of all the different new or revamped, recast regulatory bodies and how they all related to each other. And we gave up because it's so complicated. We have, in a decade, simply created a worse, more complex regulatory system in which no one knows who is responsible. But when you start to think about it, there is one gaping hole. There's one thing we haven't created, which is actually an agency that does the prosecuting when it comes to serious financial fraud. And that tells you something about the politician's mentality. They think regulation is about making reports. Regulation is not about actually taking people to account if they do wrong. And that big stick would be the best way, I think, of regulating the banking system. So I totally agree with the suggestion for we need to think very carefully, because it can't be the FCA. The FCA it can't be judge and jury. And the danger is that the president of the FCA is too much involved with having to take decisions about if some malfeasance has been found. It's the FCA who does the finding, who does the intervention. And then you get into the problem, and Noel referred to this, which is if dealing with the problem is leading to the bank losing share value and the bank's teetering, then internally inside FCA government, there's a worry that maybe we shouldn't take action, which is why we need some agency that can investigate and take action when it comes to financial impropriety.
Thank you very much. Let's find out from the audience what Noel was talking about taking action. Short answers, please. If there's a single thing that you think needs doing, that you can state quite briefly. Can we get the mic down the front of it? You go first.
Could I just raise one point? There's one thing in common between the two chairmen of Lloyds. Lord Michael went to Wharton. I happened to set up the Wharton Alumni Association. The previous one, Sir Bishop, is an alumnus at INSEAD. I was the Vice President of the INSEAD Alumni Association, and our legal expert will confirm that Sir Andrew Large is a very powerful guy in the city. He set up the FSO and the FCO. Sir Andrew Large set up the INSEAD Alumni Association with me in 1970. Let's try and use their network to nail them. Why can we not have our legal representative speak to Sir Andrew Large and ask him to strip the knighthood from Sir Bishop, the former chairman of Lloyds, and to ask that Lord Blackwell be stripped of his peerage. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin, should you want to just call out?
Do you want me to speak now? Okay, so you asked for actions that people could take. It seems to me one of the big problems we have here is the hierarchy that Noel talked about, and quite near the top of that is the FCA. We've talked today about some of the things they've said that have perhaps been economical with the actuality. It's being spun at the moment that Andrew Tyree might be the next chairman of it. I would be interested to know from the panel whether they think he would be a good chairman for it. I'd also be interested on the concrete action point to know whether anybody on the panel would consider applying for the chairmanship, and perhaps particularly thinking of George and of Anthony, both of whom I think would do a great job.
What about Noel?
Yeah, Noel, go for it.
No deal. Can I just say it is my intention to put my name forward as chair of the Financial Conduct Authority. Applications have to be in by Friday of next week. There is I would be more than happy. I think Andrew Tyree would be a great chair. I don't know quite whether he wants to do it or not. But both of us, whether it's him or me, if we did get an interview, we might run into a little trouble because the three-person interview panel for the job includes Baroness Hogg, who is the mother of Charlotte Hogg, who had to resign from Bank of England as a result of a report earlier this year from the Treasury Select Committee, which Andrew was chair of, which I sat on. So that should be some problems.
And there lies the problem.
Interesting question for you, Johnathan. Would it make a difference having a different individual? Or is the FCA, the FSA, such a creature of the financial sector that it couldn't be sufficiently robust with the banks?
Well, I think the first thing, I would Andrew Tyree a great chairman of the FCA. I think he's independent and he's a very strong-minded guy. And I think it would be a good thing for us. I do think, though, that there is an issue. It comes back to this whole question of how do you deal with financial crime and so on and so forth.
The clear link that there exists between the government and the financial sector. We have a financial sector with liabilities of 4 times GDP. This is a big deal for the government, and and therefore what happens in the financial sector concerns them in terms of taxes, financial stability, and the rest of it. But what is undoubtedly true, and George sort of touched on this, is that the Financial Conduct Authority, because of that institutional importance that the government and the British state really places on the financial sector, is not independent of it. In that one of the issues which I think has emerged in recent months is the way in which the Treasury does have, and I think George could put me right if I get this wrong, has certain reserve powers, for example, over what exactly the FCA can look into and report on. And this clearly compromises the independence of the FCA in situations where it is looking into things which might have a very, very big impact on people's lives in terms of those who've been affected by, for example, fraud, but may also have a wider sort of social impact on the tax take and the stability of a large financial institution. I think it's a difficult problem to crack, but I do think as a starting point, and you very much see these sort of conflicts arising through things like HBOS, you actually do need someone to be sufficiently independent to monitor this very large financial sector that we have, independent of the kind of considerations that the Treasury might have.
Okay, thanks. So one more action points. Can we have something down here, please?
Yes, hi. Andy Gibbs here. How and who can get this report out from a concern in GRG? Because, like many here, we've lost a sixth of our lives. Our ex-partners, our hospital service have cost a fortune just keeping us all going. How can and who can? And we need it now.
Thank you. We had a discussion earlier, but points taken. Andy Gibbs.
Yeah, I'd actually like to say something. Andy Gibbs, Director of SME Alliance. Going forward, in terms of action points, I think a very simple thing that all customers and SMEs going to the bank should get is every conversation recorded. It's that simple. You have a discussion with your bank manager about something, and that discussion should be recorded, and both parties should receive the recording. That's what the police do with suspects, and that is a very simple thing going forward. And then you've got proof. And going backwards, the problem arises for all of us because, as people know, I'm an investigator of these crimes. And what we suffer from, what everyone suffers from, is lack of disclosure, and that's where the problem lies. So I would say we need an organisation, a bit like they have in America, which is actually champions the victim, not stands in the middle as some sort of independent, but champions them with the ability to go to the bank and say, actually, that information that you're withholding, we want to see. And if you can get to see the information, it's all cleared up. And that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Dean. GRG victim and also, unfortunately, talked to GRG and Dunbar Bank Partners Group, and I can assure you Dunbar made GRG look like Samaritans. I agree with everything. I think that without prosecution, there's no teeth, and without teeth, you don't get change. And we've recently put all of our cases together into the highest lawyers in the land, and they basically said, unless you've got clear-cut fraud, any forms of action on the bank in terms of fiduciary duties or anything like that, you're wasting your time. Put your tail between your legs, go home, accept that you've been done, and as the sign above says, to thy own self be true and move on in your life. My particular area of passion is that I notice that most people in the room are mature, and I've always been a real passion of SMEs and young entrepreneurs, and I was a Richard Branson nut when I was young, and I just feel that people like Will has been so kind to our family helping, that the next generation coming through are just literally at the mercy now of these financial organisations. You cannot get any form of lending, you cannot get any form of lease, you can't get a trade account, you can't do anything now without a personal guarantee. And if you are being asked to buy a personal guarantee, and your families are being asked to buy a personal guarantee, as a young entrepreneur with organisations that is the Wild West that literally can do what they want, when they want to do it, and they can press the DEFCON button if they get into trouble, I think the British economy is toast.
I'll come back to the question over there about the financial organisations. I think the problem is that they need the expertise within them, but the expertise is almost always hopelessly conflicted. And we've only got to look at the recent financial reporting council's report on KPMG and to see who their chairman was, who I may remind you was chairman of Lloyds when a lot of this was going on, and you only have to and you only have to look at the Financial Conduct Authority to see how many people in senior positions came from Lloyds, or again, from KPMG. So it is very difficult. And I hark back, actually, it's quite interesting, One of the predecessors to the FSA came in the 1980s when there was a mass scandal over the mis-selling of life insurance. And it was interesting. I thought it was a brave decision. They brought somebody in from completely outside the city. And it rather interesting, it was my old boss, a man called Regulator Accountability. And the city slightly laughed when he arrived. They didn't laugh 4 months later, when he closed down the LLoyds Union for a month. He said, you cannot sell insurance until you've educated all your salesmen about a bit of ethics, according to this court. And he got the most almighty grip of it. And I think it's this confliction and the interests that are within our regulatory authorities that make it very difficult for them to work properly, or indeed to be given the impression of working properly to everybody who has to deal with it. And I think we have a real problem with that. More action points?
May I?
Go ahead.
I think we're skirting around it somewhat. It goes rather deeper than the banks. The big four accountancy firms act for all the banks. They're in it up to their necks. Large firms of lawyers are in it up to their necks, of course, and the revolving doors in the non-regulators are up to. We also suffer with due regard to you, sir, from the Financial Times, but we've seen the end of true investigative journalism in this country some time ago. Lawyers in-house in newspapers, what remains of them, close down any proper inquiries. Joe Public's got a very short attention span, as we know. The only thing I suggest that the SME Alliance is now in an extremely strong position to demand a full public inquiry into the whole system, the interconnectedness of the banks, the lawyers, the big four accountants. They are all in it together, and nothing short of a full public inquiry can get to the full truth.
Really, I don't think we don't talk about the history of public inquiries in this country is absolutely lamentable. I can't see it's just going to waste even more years or whatever. I still think you need to drill into the individuals in these banks and these organisations, and I think we have to try and get people to wake up to the crimes that are being committed. And we also have got to persuade people in the city to use the same dictionary as the rest of us, because none of them seem to understand the meaning of the word independent. I find it absolutely extraordinary that Russell Griggs can still, I think it was in The Guardian, maintain his independence, and I'm disappointed that Dame Linda Dobbs says she's independent. These people can't be independent if they take money from the people they're investigating. Time for one more from the floor.
After listening to the judge for 45 minutes, I will tell them we discussed. The barrister also lied for Lloyds, which can be checked with the transcripts or recordings. We've got a very old bit of law in this country, it's so strict cases. It says that a common man is entitled to a fair trial. It's called Magna Carta. Commissioner Stansfield, will you not support us if we feel that the judge is stripping away our evidence and a barrister can be proved? Are we not entitled to a fair trial by jury? Most of Lloyd's actions are fraudulent. Why can't we let the people decide rather than some of these bench judges? You get a good judge and you get a bench judge, but also line barristers. The whole legal system, when your money is down, is geared against you.
Very, very briefly, it is not up to the police to prosecute. That is done by the Crown Prosecution Service. And I think one of the concerns is what the Crown Prosecution Service is prepared to take on. And it is not up, I can't, my police force will not prosecute this case. It's done by the Crown Prosecution Service. And it's not even my local Crown Prosecution Service. It comes straight back to the Crown Prosecution Service in London. And I have a very big case with, in my view, probably, maybe a massive fraud. But it is not up to me or my chief constable whether I can prosecute that case. It goes up to the Crown Prosecution Service. And I just hope that they will do so. Thank you.
Going more back to the close, I've just been asking each of the panellists to give one sentence about how things could be better 10 years from now. If someone were to really address this. And I want to start with George Kerevan.
We need to set up a system of tribunals so that you have the legal redress that you don't have at the moment to take on the big business.
Well, in Imperial China, they had a very simple rule, which was if the bank went bust and had to run, the directors would be beheaded on the front steps. The key to this is personal accountability. There needs to be a way in which those who direct these organisations are held to account for the behaviour of the organisations they run. And I think we made some small steps in that direction, but I think we need to go further. yes, we need to finance the pursuit of major fraud properly. It is not financed at all. It needs about 500 million in my view, and it can easily be paid for from the fines that are coming from the Financial Conduct Authority rather than going back to the Treasury. We need regional police serious fraud units, not with necessarily policemen, but we need a few to knock on the doors, but largely with experts in this area. And we also need to finance properly the City of London and the Serious Fraud Office. We can easily afford to do it. Can you say in one sentence, do you think? We have to stop the culture that says bigger is better. We need smaller banks, and we need politicians with priorities that don't involve high-speed trains costing billions, and they focus upon the lifeblood of our country, our smaller businesses. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening, and the last hand to the panel, please, before we hand that to you.
Unfortunately, we have one more friend who would like to speak to the audience, speak to the members. He's just come straight from the Labour Party conference, and he's agreed to just give us a few words. The Shadow Small Business Minister, Bill Esterson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and can I just congratulate the work that Andy and the others, I've had a conversation with Andy about this, and Heather asked me to plug the APPG on fair banking, what a brilliant job she and they have done in bringing this to attention to those of us in Parliament. George, when he was still an MP, was heavily involved in that. He and I served on the Treasury Select Committee, albeit for a few brief months, but I thought he was excellent on that, and he certainly get my vote for running the FCA. But look, I ran a small business before I became an MP in 2010, and when the financial crisis hit, like I guess most of you in the room, suddenly I was told you've got to pay back your borrowing facility today or face the consequences. Happily, we were in a position where we had reserves and were able to do so, unlike so many of you. I now have multiple inquiries growing every day, some from my own constituents, most from around the country, of people with appalling stories of how the banks have butchered not just the businesses but have destroyed lives, and in some cases seen lives taken. And you are all far more familiar with this than I am, but just very briefly, somebody who had personal banking with NatWest as well as their business, their personal accounts were frozen so that they fell into default because they were unable to pay the mortgages on their commercial properties. 10 years later, they are absolutely ruined, despite trying absolutely everything they could to resolve it. There has been no prospect of remedy for them. Another business that's still trading is still in the successor to GRG, still paying very high fees, still suffering and unable to escape the high costs. And you know, we saw just on Friday, didn't we, the way that Ross McEwen had a blacklist of businesses he refused to speak to when they called to speak to him. You know, there is clearly something very, very wrong in what has been going on, and the more I learn, it goes back from before the financial crisis. And you know, there is this cultural and systemic problem that needs to be resolved. So I've called for the FCA report to be released. I wrote to the Prime Minister to say that. I also said, and I heard Noel's comments, I also said that there should be a judge-led inquiry. One of the reasons I said that is I think that unless we can get everything acknowledged publicly, I think the truth is no, actually. I don't think this is a question about the truth not being out there, because you've already explained it. But it's got to be acknowledged. And I think that can only come with an inquiry. That doesn't mean you have to wait for justice to happen at the same time. So I'm also saying that we should be seeing realistic compensation as soon as possible whilst we are getting that acknowledgement of the truth. So those things I think have to happen in parallel, and it cannot come a moment too soon. This isn't going to go away for the banks, it's not going to go away for policymakers, and this is fundamentally important for fairness and for justice for each and every one of you, and for thousands more people like you around the country. But it's also fundamentally important, as a couple of you I heard say, for the economy, because we have a fundamentally unproductive economy for many reasons in this country, but one of them is the way that smaller firms are treated by larger firms, especially in the financial sector, and have been for many, many years. Because having a proper and equitable system of access to finance is crucial to unlocking the potential for the creation of high-paid jobs, successful and profitable businesses. That is crucial to our success in this uncertain world, and it's crucial, even more so, as technology continues to evolve and we need to innovate, to develop, to prosper and to thrive.
So those are my thoughts, that's where I got to. I will continue the work. I haven't had a reply from the Prime Minister yet. So when Parliament resumes, where are we? It's been a long week already in a conference. Next week's Conservative conference, the week after Parliament resumes, I will be pursuing a reply to my letter to the Prime Minister and everywhere else. Jeremy Corbyn and Johnathan are fully aware of this. Had meetings with some of you, and they are fully supportive of the efforts that you are making. So you have Labour support. I know that the SNP similarly feel the need to take action, and you have a powerful advocate in George. I can't quite say I wish you were still in Parliament, George, because I get in a lot of trouble. But you kind of know the sense of what I'm saying. But I think it's brilliant you've carried on in the support you've given, and we'll be there with you as much as we possibly can. It needs to be resolved. Justice needs to be done. It needs to be seen to be done for everybody who's been so badly treated. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Well, you'd be glad to know I didn't have a speech anyway, so the fact that time's gone, we've had such a fantastic session, and I can tell everybody about how we're going forward at another date or in blogs or things. So I really just want to take this opportunity to thank our amazing panel. I think it's just such a fantastic I'll talk about all the things I was going to talk about in blogs. We've got a selection of sandwiches and things outside. There's a bar outside. Bring your sandwiches in here. There'll be free prosecco. We'll be cutting the cake later. Please give us your donations because we desperately need them. And most of all, I just want to thank all of our members and friends who came. Some of you have come such a long way. And I think, it's true what Nick said. Who would have believed 3 years ago when 30 of us sat in the Law Society and went, we're going to roll our sleeves up and do something, that it would have grown to this extent? And I just have a feeling now that it's like a springboard now. We have an opportunity to grow much more because we have powerful allies. And a lot of friends in the press. I hope Noel will be one of our allies in the future and stick with us. Anthony is a very powerful ally. Jonathan's always writing about it, so George would want you to be up there in this. So thank you to everybody who's come. Well done you. These are people who made SME Alliance such a success, its members. So thank you very much to all of you.